Bravo, right on. Hello, I'm International Master Danny Kopek, and I would like to thank you for purchasing this videotape. I hope that you will find it pleasurable and enlightening. I relish this opportunity to share my years of knowledge and experience with you. Our goal is to give you the knowledge and techniques that you will need to enable you to visualize winning chess combinations. We've often heard it said that chess is 99% tactics. Although I do not share this view, I would agree that tactical play involves at least 50% of the considerations in most positions. I've come to believe that the ability to select a chess move, and really the best move in a given position, is based on the following four major considerations. 1. Tactical factors. 2. Strategical factors. 3. Specific knowledge about concepts, themes, and configurations special to the opening, middle games, and endings. And finally, 4. Bridge moves, or moves which may combine any of the three previous factors. So what exactly is tactical play? Tactical play can be defined as the interaction of opposing forces. It often involves checks, pins, captures, double attacks, etc. Tactical play is episodic and can be deemed to end when there are no further interactions of opposing forces. Then we can say the position is quiescent or quiet. Strategical play, on the other hand, involves long-term positional considerations, such as pawn structures and their destruction or improvement, outposting of pieces such as knights in the center where they cannot be removed, control of an open file, absolute control, diagonals, possession of them without any conflict, etc., etc. Strategical play ends when there are interactions of forces and we enter the realm of tactical play. Clearly, without an extensive array of tactical tools or methods, there are definite limitations to how far a chess player can advance. We now come to the most important definition on this tape. What exactly is a combination? A combination is a sequence of moves or chain of moves which forces a transformation of the position from a certain board state to a definable, tangible advantage. Throughout this tape, you will be seeing a few of my students who will be posing some of the most pertinent questions which have been raised to me during my years of experience with regard to tactics and combinations. My objective here is to present the tools which I feel are the essential elements for consistently finding and producing combinations in positions where they are available. Combinations can be classified to fall into four categories, including the mating attack, the material gain combination, the drawing combination, and the positional combination. Naturally, there are too many possibilities or combinations of pieces in chess to memorize every possible opportunity to implement or invoke a winning pattern. Nonetheless, it is very important to learn as many common patterns or configurations of pieces or formations, if you will, as possible. For it is generally accepted by those who have studied chess skill in people that such skill is based on pattern recognition and pattern recognition alone. So, the more patterns you can routinely recognize, the more that you have in your memory, the more successful you are likely to be. My goal is to here help you learn the most relevant patterns by presenting a nomenclature, a set of standard terms and examples which will facilitate the pattern-based learning process for you. Once you are familiar with these patterns, you will find it easier to visualize winning combinations. Now we're going to look at 4 patterns where the knight and rook combine to deliver mate.
Rook and knight pattern 1. Pattern 2. Pattern 3. And pattern 4. This particular pattern often results from a queen sacrifice, which we'll show later.
Now we will look at some simple examples which invoke the patterns you have just seen. In this example, note that black has a big hole on the f6 square and that black has an abundance of material, but it is white's move, and white plays knight f6 check, and black is forced to play king h8, and white plays rook h7 mate. This is the familiar mating pattern with the knight on f6 combining with the rook on h7 to deliver mate. In the diagram position, this time again, white is down a significant amount of material, and in fact his rook on b7 is attacked. But white can rescue his game with 1 knight f6 check. And now, if black plays king h8, we see the mate occurring again with rook to h7. On the other hand, if black plays king f8, white has knight h7 check, king e8 or king g8. On either move, white continues with knight f6 check, and the rescue operation with the knight f6 check perpetual with the support of the rook guarding the complete 7th rank has achieved a draw for white. In the diagram position, black is threatening mate with either queen takes g2 or a rook or queen to the 1st rank. However, it is white's move, and after 1 rook c8 check, black has 2 choices. 1, king f7, and the other is king h7. After king f7, white simply plays rook f8 mate, and that is due to the fact, in addition to the pawn on f5, which supports white's mate, white also has a pawn on d6, which prevents the escape of the black king. Returning to the position where white has just played rook c8 check, black's other alternative is king h7, and now white plays knight f8 check, and now either on king g8 or king h8, white has knight g6 discovery, and whether black plays king f7 or king h7, white will play on king f7, rook f8 mate, and on king h7, white has rook h8 mate. A slight variant of the simplest mating pattern involving the rook and knight that we've seen earlier from a more realistic and complex situation. The following example is taken from my co-authored book, Mastering Chess. It is from Jeff Chandler's section on tactics and combinations, and Mr. Chandler developed the following original position, whereby white plays 1 knight e7 check, black plays king h8, and white now plays queen takes h7 check, and then after black plays king takes h7, white has rook h1 mate. An original combination involving the knight and rook mate. The next few examples illustrate the rook and knight mate patterns that we've just seen from real play between masters. In the first position, taken from Vinogradev Fedin, USSR 1973, White's final and conclusive assault comes just in time, as Black's knight forks the white queen, rook, and bishop, so in effect all of White's pieces are on pre. But White plays 1. Queen takes h6, check. White finds an original way to deliver the rook and knight mate, this time on g8, with the knight still entrenched on f6 as the main pattern. G takes h6. Rook takes h6, check. King g7. Rook h7, check. King f8. Rook h8, check. King g7. Rook g8, check. King h6. And now a final touch is g5, mate. Note again that the knight and rook have collaborated with the knight perched on f6 and the rook controlling the g file in this example. This position is taken from the game Kopek versus Toyton, Montreal, 1991. It is a complex position, and it is noteworthy that Black's queen is rather uncomfortable on h5, but as compensation, White had to relinquish his king bishop. Black also threatens to trap the white queen with 31 bishop h6. However, White's knights are active in the center, and his queen's rook has a free rein on the b file, so White was able to find 1. 31, rook takes b7. Then, Black played bishop h6, following up with his threat to trap the white queen. However, despite the loss of the queen, White will have all the fun. The fact that the Black king is exposed and White's rook and knights are cooperating, coupled with an attack on the Black queen, suggests that this combination should indeed work. Play continued. Queen takes f6, check. Rook takes f6. Knight takes f6. And White is threatening the familiar mate on h7. So Black played bishop f3 check, and White played king to g1. Black has little choice. Besides the obvious threat on h7, mating pattern A, there is the secondary mate starting with knight f7 check, which is exactly what happens to Black in this game. Bishop f8, knight f7 check, king g7, knight g5 discover check. Now on king h8, White could win routinely with 37, knight takes h5, bishop takes h5, rook b8, followed by knight e6. So, Black plays king takes f6, White plays e5 check. Yes, that pawn is still guarded by the rook on e1. Black plays king f5. White plays rook f7 check. And Black resigned because after king g4, rook f4 is mate. Now we're going to show you three familiar patterns involving mates with the bishop and rook. In each of these examples, note that the queen could be substituted for either the rook or the bishop to deliver mate. And this is useful to know because then this pattern serves you both in the middle games and in the endings.
Rook and bishop pattern 2. And pattern 3.
In this position, both sides are attacking furiously on opposite wings. Note that black has the fianchetto formation around his king, and he even has the bishop guarding the dark squares. However, white has an abundance of force on the h-file and a strong influence on the square h8. So white plays 1, queen h8 check. Black is forced to play bishop takes queen, and white plays rook takes bishop mate. Let us now look at 4 examples from real play. In the diagram position, between Grandmaster Lajos Portish of Hungary, white, and Grandmaster Vlastimil Hort, formerly of Czechoslovakia, played at the Palma de Mallorca International Tournament in 1971, it appears that white has wasted his forces on the doubled rooks on the h-file, since there is no immediate threat there. White could even win the exchange with bishop takes d4, but that would only lead to trouble after black plays rook takes d4 and has all the play. He threatens the pawn on f4 as well as knight d5 followed by knight c3 check. White would then be very hard pressed to even achieve equality. Instead, after bishop h4 as played by Grandmaster Portish, everything is very clear. White will follow with bishop f6 and then with rook h8, which will be an unstoppable mate. The game continued. King f8, and now white played bishop to g5. The threat, after black, for example, plays rook on 8 to d7, is rook h8 check, bishop takes h8, rook takes h8 check, king g7, bishop f6, mate. So returning to the position where white has just played bishop g5, black played knight to d5, which not only guards the f6 square, but also threatens knight to c3 check as well. However, there is now a rook hanging on d8. That is the major drawback of knight to d5. And white played bishop takes d8, black played rook to d2, and white played bishop to g5, and black played rook takes e2, when he threatens to draw with knight to c3 check, the familiar perpetual pattern that we showed you earlier with rook and knight. So white played rook takes e2, removing the rook, knight c3 check, king c2, knight takes e2, king d3, and black resigned. According to Grandmaster Hort, by his own admission in the wonderful book, The Best Move, co-authored with G.M. Jansa, white's play at the end of this game was entirely brilliant. The experienced and knowledgeable player will recognize by inspection that white's weakened light squares and generally passive position are the result of having tried to defend against the Marshall Gambit in the Ruy Lopez, where black has played an early d5 and gambited a pawn. In such a theoretical jungle, a game which concludes as follows would only be a footnote for how white should not play. Play continued. Bishop f3, queen f1, and now black has 2 alternatives. Queen takes h2 check, king takes h2, rook h6 check, but white has queen h3 when black has simply sacrificed too much. So instead, black plays his second alternative, which is rook h6, threatening queen takes h2 mate. So white plays h4, trying to stop mate. Black plays queen takes h4, once again threatening the familiar mate on h1. White plays g takes h4, and black plays rook g6, check. Now white could resign, and did in fact, because on queen g2, black has rook takes g2 check, because after king f1, black simply plays bishop h2 with mate on g1 to follow. This is another sharp position which occurred in the game Johansson C. Eckenberg, Sweden, 1974. Again, the experienced chess aficionado will know that this position resulted from the very popular, sharp, and currently overanalyzed Semi-Moran variation of the Slav. However, who with white would want to be subjected to the devastating and beautiful manifestation of the following well-known mating pattern? Something went terribly wrong for white. Or perhaps he expected the black queen to move off the a8, h1 diagonal? No way. Black played queen takes f3. This forces the opening of the g file as black threatens mate on g2, and who wouldn't want a queen? White plays g takes f3. Black plays rook d to g8, check. Now the only way that white can stop mate, because if he plays king to h1, black has bishop f3, mate. Instead, white plays bishop g3. And black, noticing that the pawn on f2 is pinned, plays rook takes g3, check. And again, white's only move is h takes g3, and black plays bishop takes f3 with the very common mate, rook to h1, threatened and unstoppable. One of the most famous positions in the annals of computer chess occurred at the Second World Computer Chess Championship in Toronto, 1977, when Kesa, the first computer chess champion, played, instead of the normal king g7, rook e8. This left an audience of some 500 people, including a former world champion, quite perplexed. What had Kesa seen that nearly everyone else had overlooked? Let us investigate one king g7 further. After king g7, white has queen f8, check, double exclamation mark. And then on king takes f8, bishop h6, check, bishop g7, rook c8, check, rook e8, rook takes e8, with a very familiar variant of the mating patterns we've been looking at. The move played by Kesa, rook e8, survives the longest and comes right out of its brute force search. Now we're going to look at some familiar patterns involving mates delivered by bishop and knight coordinating, usually in the middle game.
Bishop and knight pattern 1. And bishop and knight pattern 2.
The following example is from the game Garcia Perez versus Van der Wiel, Netherlands 1980. The conglomeration of white pieces around the black king and the weakness of the black squares in that zone suggests that white may be able to do something spectacular. The first move by white is indeed spectacular. 1. Rook takes f5. It does not matter what black does now. Regardless, he will be mated. If rook takes e2, then white has rook takes f8, check, king g7, rook g8, mate. If instead, after rook takes f5, black plays rook takes f5 himself, white has queen e5, check, and black's only move is rook takes e5, and white delivers mate with bishop f6. And had black, after the first move, rook takes f5, captured the rook with either pawn, the g pawn or the e pawn, white of course mates with queen e5. The diagram position is quite sharp as the black queen is attacked and white threatens check. Yet, black can resort to a relatively rare pattern to crown the attack on the white king. And this starts with 1. Queen e5, double exclamation mark. And now white plays the only move, which is queen a3. The point is that had white taken on e5, with bishop takes e5, black has the relatively rare mate bishop takes e5, again combining the bishop and knight. So, white plays queen a3, the only move, and black plays queen e1, exclamation mark, attacking from the other side. Now, if rook takes e1, black has rook takes e1, mate. So, white resorts to queen a8 check, which was his threat. Black plays king c7, and white plays queen a5 check. And black, to get out of the checks, plays king b8. And here, white could secure some pretty good drawing chances with queen d8 check, exclamation mark, decoying the black rook, and black plays rook takes d8, white plays rook takes e1,